Every morning before you walk into your clinical site, your classroom, your program, something happens that nobody sees and nobody talks about. You put on a version of yourself, not a fake version exactly, more like a filtered version. The version that remembers to make eye contact at the right moments, that laughs at the right times, that asks the right questions and stays quiet at the right moments. That looks engaged even when your brain is somewhere else entirely. That looks calm even when your nervous system is running at full speed underneath. You do this so automatically and so constantly that you might not even realize you are doing it. It just feels like functioning, like being a professional, like being normal. It has a name. It is called masking, and it is one of the most exhausting things an ADHD brain does every single day, and in healthcare settings, it costs more than most people realize. Today, we are going to talk about what masking actually is, where it comes from, what it costs you, how it shows up specifically in clinical training, and what it looks like to start unmasking safely without blowing up your career or your relationships. So let's start with what masking actually is, because I think there is a version of it that gets described in a way that makes it sound more intentional and more conscious than it actually is for most people. Masking is the process of suppressing, camouflaging, or compensating for neurodivergent traits in order to appear more neurotypical. It can include things like forcing eye contact, even when it feels uncomfortable, suppressing the urge to move or fidget in situations where that would be noticed, monitoring your speech patterns to sound more measured and less tangential, rehearsing conversations before they happen, scripting social interactions in your head in real time, copying the body language and mannerisms of people around you, and hiding the fact that you are struggling with something that appears simple to everyone else. For many ADHD people, especially those who are diagnosed later in life, masking started in childhood as a survival strategy. You learned very early that your natural way of being, the impulsivity, the distractibility, the emotional intensity, the blurting things out, made people uncomfortable or got you in trouble. So you started managing it, containing it, performing a version of yourself that was easier for the world to accept. And here's the thing about a survival strategy that starts in childhood. By the time you are an adult in a demanding professional training program, it is so deeply automatic that you do not experience it as a choice anymore. It just feels like who you are, which makes it incredibly hard to recognize, incredibly hard to talk about, and incredibly hard to address. I want to talk about the origin of masking, more specifically because I think understanding where it comes from changes how you relate to it in yourself. Most ADHD people who mask heavily have a history of being misunderstood, not just occasionally, chronically. You were told you were too much, too loud, too intense, too sensitive, too distracted, too scattered. Or you were told you were not enough. Not focused enough, not consistent enough, not trying hard enough, not living up to your potential. Those messages, delivered repeatedly over years by teachers, family members, peers, coaches, anyone whose approval mattered to you, created a belief system. The belief that your natural self was somehow wrong. That you needed to be managed and contained in order to be acceptable. That if people really saw how your brain worked, they would think less of you. Masking is the behavioral output of that belief system. It is your nervous system trying to protect you from the rejection and criticism that your history taught you to expect. And understanding that is important because it means masking is not something to be ashamed of. It was adaptive. It served a real purpose at a real point in your life. The question is not why did you start masking? The question is whether the cost of continuing to mask at the same intensity is still worth what it gives you. And in most cases, especially in healthcare training, the answer is increasingly no. Let's talk about what masking actually costs, because I think this is where most people have their first real moment of recognition. The primary cost is cognitive and neurological exhaustion. Masking requires your brain to run a constant background process that monitors your behavior, filters your responses, adjusts your presentation, and manages how you are being perceived in real time. That process uses significant executive function resources, the exact resources that ADHD already makes scarce. Think of it this way. You have a finite amount of cognitive bandwidth available on any given day. Masking is quietly consuming a portion of that bandwidth every single moment you are in a social or professional environment, which means the bandwidth available for actual clinical thinking, for learning, for problem solving, for emotional regulation is reduced before you have even started the work of the day. This is why so many ADHD people describe coming home from a day that looked fine on paper and feeling completely destroyed, not tired in the normal way. destroyed in a way that takes hours to recover from and sometimes bleeds into the next day. That is masking fatigue. And it is real and it is physiological. The second cost is identity confusion. When you spend years performing a version of yourself that is different from how you actually experience the world, you can lose track of where the mask ends and you begin. You stop knowing what you actually think, what you actually feel, what you actually need, because you have been managing and filtering all of that for so long that your own internal signals feel unfamiliar. This shows up in healthcare training as difficulty advocating for yourself, difficulty knowing when you are struggling, difficulty asking for help, and a chronic low-grade sense of fraudulence even when you are performing well. You feel like you are getting away with something, because on some level you believe that the person who is succeeding in your program is the masked version of you, not the real one. The third cost is relational distance. Masking keeps people at arm's length. When you are performing rather than being, genuine connection is impossible because nobody is actually connecting with you. They are connecting with the version of you that you have curated for them to see. This can create a profound loneliness even when you are surrounded by people. You might have colleagues who like you, supervisors who respect you, classmates who think highly of you, and still feel deeply unseen. Because the parts of you that you are most proud of, the way your brain makes unexpected connections, the intensity of your curiosity, the depth of your empathy, are often the parts you are most carefully hiding. And over time, that relational distance becomes its own kind of exhaustion. You are working hard to be liked and respected, and at the same time, you are not letting anyone actually know you. That tension is unsustainable. Now let's get specific about how masking shows up in healthcare training, because I think this is where it gets most costly and also most invisible. Clinical environments have an extremely strong culture of professionalism that is often quite narrow in its definition. There is a right way to present yourself, a right way to communicate, a right way to interact with supervisors and patients and staff. And while some of those norms exist for genuinely good reasons, patient safety, professional trust, effective communication, others are just cultural expectations that have nothing to do with clinical competence. For ADHD students, navigating that culture while simultaneously masking means you are managing an enormous amount of invisible work on top of the already enormous visible work of learning to be a clinician. You are monitoring your body language in every patient interaction. You are scripting your responses before feedback conversations with your clinical instructor. You are suppressing the urge to hyper-focus on the interesting case and redirect to the administrative task you are supposed to be doing. You are performing attentiveness in team meetings even when your brain has completely checked out. You are pretending that the transition between patients is easy when internally every transition costs you a significant amount of executive function to manage. And you are doing all of this while trying to learn an enormous amount of clinical content, develop new skills, build professional relationships, and manage the emotional demands of working with patients who are sick, scared, and vulnerable. The fact that you are still standing is not a small thing. It is a testament to how hard you are working even when nobody can see it. So let's talk about unmasking, because I want to be clear about what unmasking is and is not before we go any further. Unmasking is not flipping a switch and suddenly being a completely different person in every professional context. It is not abandoning all professional norms or deciding that masking was bad and you are never doing it again. Some degree of code switching and contextual adaptation is a normal part of professional life for everyone. That is not the masking we are talking about here. The masking we are talking about is the chronic suppression of your authentic self to the point of exhaustion and identity loss. And unmasking in that context is a gradual process of giving yourself permission to take up more space, to let more of your real self exist in your professional life, to stop performing things that cost you enormously and give you very little in return. Here's what that can look like practically in a clinical training context. It can look like stopping the performance of certainty when you do not know something. Saying, I am not sure, let me look that up, or I want to make sure I get this right. Can you walk me through that again, instead of projecting confidence you do not feel and hoping nobody notices? It can look like letting your genuine curiosity show even when it takes you slightly off the expected path. Asking the question that is not on the protocol because you genuinely want to understand. Sharing the connection you just made between two concepts, even if it comes out a little non-linearly. It can look like admitting to a clinical instructor that you find transitions between patients difficult and asking if there is a system that could help. Not as a disclosure of ADHD, but as honest self-awareness about your learning needs. It can look like fidgeting with something in your pocket during a long meeting instead of performing stillness for 2 hours and then having nothing left for the patient session afterward. Small things, low-stakes things, but each one is a deposit into a version of yourself that is more sustainable, more honest, and ultimately more effective as a clinician. One of the most useful things you can do right now is start mapping your own masking patterns. Not to judge them, just to see them clearly, because you cannot make intentional choices about something you are not aware of. Ask yourself these questions and write down your honest answers. Where in my daily life am I performing rather than being? What specific behaviors or traits am I suppressing most consistently? When does masking feel necessary for my safety or professional reputation, and when is it just habit? What would I do differently if I knew I would not be judged for it? What parts of myself am I most afraid to show in professional settings, and why? Those answers are your map, and that map is the starting point for building a professional life that does not require you to disappear inside it. I also want to talk about masking recovery, because I think it is something that gets overlooked even in conversations about unmasking. On the days when masking is unavoidable, and there will be many of those, especially during intensive clinical placements, recovery is not optional. Your nervous system genuinely needs time and space to decompress after sustained masking, the same way your muscles need recovery after sustained physical exertion. What does masking recovery look like practically? It looks like protecting time after high masking periods where you are not required to perform for anyone, where you can be physically unguarded, mentally unfiltered, and socially off-duty. For some people, this is a walk alone with no podcast or music, just silence and movement. For some people, it is 15 minutes of doing something completely absorbing and low stakes, a game, a show, something that asks nothing of your executive function or your social presentation. For some people, it is physical release, exercise, dancing, anything that moves the stored tension out of your body. The specifics matter less than the intention. The intention is to give yourself a period of genuine unmasking every single day, even if it is short, even if it is imperfect, as a way of signaling to your nervous system that it does not have to be on guard all the time. That there are spaces in your life where it is safe to put the performance down. Building those spaces deliberately is not indulgent. It is how you sustain a career in healthcare over the long term without losing yourself inside it. I want to close by saying something that I think a lot of ADHD people in healthcare need to hear. The traits you are masking are often the exact traits that make you exceptional at this work. The emotional intensity that you have spent years managing and containing is what makes you feel what your patients feel. The nonlinear thinking that you suppress in team meetings is what makes you see connections that other people miss. The hyperfocus that you redirect away from interesting cases is what makes you exceptional when you are working in your area of genuine passion. The authenticity that you filter out of your professional presentation is what makes patients trust you. You are not masking your weaknesses, you are masking your strengths along with them, and healthcare needs those strengths desperately. The goal is not to become someone different, the goal is to build a professional life that has enough room in it for who you actually are. That requires courage and self-awareness and the willingness to take up space in a field that has historically asked neurodivergent people to make themselves smaller. But it is possible, and it starts with naming what has been happening, which is exactly what you did today by watching this video. You are not too much. You are not the wrong kind of person for this field. You are someone who has been working incredibly hard for a very long time in ways that nobody could see, and it is time to start giving yourself credit for that. If this video resonated with you, the Mind and Motion Clinical Focus Guide has sections on emotional regulation, burnout prevention, and surviving rotations that address the specific demands of clinical life for ADHD brains. Everything we talked about today connects directly to the systems inside the guide. The reading guide and the workbook are both linked in the description. If you are in the middle of a rotation right now or heading into one soon, the workbook rotation pages are specifically built for the kind of emotional and cognitive demands we talked about today. Go check it out. Structure your mind, move with purpose. I will see you in the next one.